Okay, it's 4:02, 2 past the hour. I think we can kickstart this wonderful meeting here. So hello and good afternoon again from Sonbong, South Korea, here at the Green Climate Fund and the Independent Evaluation Unit. We welcome you all. So we've got about 100 people and a couple more waiting in the waiting room. So that's a very, very nice number for a lovely afternoon virtual talk. So just for those that don't know us, this is the Independent Evaluation Unit of the Green Climate Fund. We're holding monthly lunch talks here at the Green Climate Fund, all about evaluation, climate change, and matters that concern the most of us, nature and environment. And given the circumstances that we are facing with COVID-19 and the necessity of social distancing, our lunch talks have become virtual talks. And that's just to adjust and fit to a new reality that we're all facing. So these virtual talks take place instead of our in-person lunch talks here at the G Tower, the headquarters of the Green Climate Fund in South Korea. And we are hoping that post-COVID-19, we have these virtual talks as a companion to our monthly lunch talks to offer a new outlet to speakers as well as to attendees that may be unable to come here to Sonbong, South Korea, and still give everyone a great opportunity and a great venue for dialogue and exchange. So without this, we also use the opportunity to increase the understanding about the Independent Evaluation Unit of the Green Climate Fund, as well as the Green Climate Fund itself, while also raising awareness of the diverse voices and streams of learning in the area of evaluation, climate change, and development. All of our lunch talks, as well as our virtual talks, are recorded. So you will be able to find and watch each and every lunch talk on our IEU YouTube channel at a later stage. We would like to encourage all of you to tweet using our IEU hashtag and IEU handle. So the handle would be @GCF_eval and the hashtag is @IEU talks. These talks are open to everyone, so we really encourage everyone to join. These are not internal meetings to the GCF. While having said that, we have an array of our colleagues here joining our lunch talks as well as our virtual talks, just to get a better and bigger understanding of the different issues that you'd like to discuss. So coming to today's talk, as you can all see, it's the IEU Virtual Talk on climate change and biodiversity related to actions in the DPR in Korea. And challenges and opportunities are at the forefront of this discussion. So we've got about an hour, so from 4 to 5, and the session is structured the following way. We're gonna have a 25 to 30 minutes presentation by our two presenters, Doug and Dr. Seliger. And that will be followed by a moderated session for Q&A, where you will all be invited to give your opinions or maybe even your questions to us, and we'll discuss them as many as we can. So we would like to encourage you to all use the chat box available to you and ask any question at any point in time, and we'll come back to this during this Q&A session. So now to our presenters. So we've got Doug Watkins. He is the Chief Executive of the East Asian-Australasian Flyway Partnership, Secretariat. And he's come to us with over 40 years of involvement and experience in conservation of migratory waterbirds and their habitats. He's also come to us as a former manager of the Wetlands International Oceania. And our second presenter is Dr. Bernhard Seliger. He is the resident representative of the Seidel Foundation here in South Korea. And he comes to us with almost 2 decades of experience in reforestation and wetlands conservation efforts in the DPR Korea. So thanks again for joining us. And without further ado, I just want to highlight again, please use the conversation box that you have here in Zoom, the Zoom chat box, and share your thoughts and your questions with us. And we'll come back to this at a later stage. Thanks to this, I'll come to, at a later stage, to follow up meetings that we're also planning. Okay, here we go. Over to you, Doug.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Doug Watkins. I'm the Chief Executive for the EAAFP Partnership at Secretariat, and I'm addressing integrating biodiversity into climate change adaptation planning with a focus on migratory waterbirds. So this, get rid of this. So there are two components to this. One is the waterbird, one is the wetlands, and also the waterbirds. And we manage waterbirds by managing our wetlands, the habitat that the waterbirds use. And it's valuable just to reflect a bit that wetlands also have a significant role in carbon sequestration. And the figure on the left-hand side is comparing three types of wetland types with three types of forest types, and it's also on a logarithmic scale. So the other side, on the waterbirds have an annual life cycle where they are in the northern hemisphere, in the far north, in the Arctic areas for to breed, to nest and raise their chicks. And then they are moving south again as summer starts to finish. They're using staging sites on their way south, and then they're wintering in Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia, and also Australasia. And after the wintering period, as spring starts in the northern hemisphere, the birds start back again on that migration. And each migration, they need to be stopping over at some sites to feed up again, to replenish their fat supply, and to, importantly, be in good condition when they get to the breeding areas. So the slide didn't shift forward. The screen is okay. This just takes time. Okay, the Flyway, East Asian Australasian Flyway, you can see in the centre of the screen with the red line around it. So this is one of the 9 flyways across the world. These are a ecological and a social construct, because when we work on initiatives together, we also have to consider socially how easiest, or how to make the flyway as small as possible so that we can work more effectively. The partnership was formed 14 years ago. Its aim is to conserve migratory waterbirds, internationally important sites, and the ecosystem services these sites provide for local communities. And what makes it quite unique is that it's a voluntary network of partners. It's guided by a 10-year strategic plan, and we have meetings of partners every 2 years, as long as coronavirus doesn't get in the way. We have 37 partners at the moment. These include national governments, intergovernmental organisations, which are like convention secretariats, international NGOs, an international organisation, and also one corporate. A core component of the work of the Flyway Partnership is developing a Flyway network of sites across the Flyway, and these are internationally important sites for individual migratory waterbird populations. The network is now 147 sites, but we estimate there is at least 1,000 internationally important sites in the Flyway. So we still have a considerable way to go to build this network. The primary threat to these important sites is habitat loss due to economic development. And we need to be working on that and improving how we do economic development, how we continue to maintain the biodiversity values of our areas. So shifting to the Arctic, what's happening there is the Arctic is continuing to warm at more than twice the global mean. and recent years have been the highest on record for the Arctic. So that's affecting the habitats that are there in the Arctic. And one of these is the tundra habitat. And on the figure on the right-hand side, the red areas are anticipated to be lost by the second half of this century. The blue areas are where tundra remains, and you can see a few areas where the tundra habitat will expand. So the specific impacts upon migratory waterbirds, there are changes in the arrival and departure time from the breeding areas. The higher temperatures are pushing the breeding birds further north, and this is creating a mismatch in the migration timing and food availability. In looking at adaptation, we can divide the year into two periods, the breeding and the staging in non-breeding areas. In the breeding areas where the birds are at low density over very large areas, adaptation options are very limited. But when birds are staging and in the non-breeding area, there are things that we can do with management of water flows, water levels, and habitat in inland wetlands. And in coastal areas, what will be important is securing habitat above the current sea level for wetland restoration and modification of existing artificial wetlands to compensate for lost habitat. So here is an example in northwest Bohai Bay in Hubei province, China. And this is showing in the dark blue on the land side is aquaculture and a salt works. The yellow arrows are showing the feeding area for the migratory shorebirds when the tide is low, and when the tide comes in, these birds are all now pushed into this artificial wetland for roosting at high tide, but also it's providing important feeding areas. So there can be up to almost 50,000 birds using this area during the migration period. Slow to change slides.
Yeah. Takes a little bit of time.
Next, I'll talk about some key elements that I consider need to be addressed in planning and assessment of climate adaptation projects. One is the level of integration of national climate change adaptation mechanisms. The second is the extent to which adaptation planning and implementation mechanisms are inclusive of local communities. And thirdly, there's a need for the site-specific predictions of the effect of climate change, because you need to have that information when you start sitting down and talking with local communities. So as I was talking a bit about monitoring and evaluation, for the Flyway partnership, we're about the conservation of migratory waterbirds. We have one measure in place, the waterbird population estimates, which is led by one of the partners, Wetlands International. And they're also working on developing a portal on the conservation status of each of the populations in the Flyway. And this is our fundamental evaluation of our success at the Flyway level. At the national level, our science unit is starting to develop a portal about the sites within the network. And so this will give us information about the sorts of threats and the sorts of management practices happening at the important sites. So we're now collaborating to ensure that biodiversity considerations are integrated into national climate change adaptation policies, to developing model community-based landscape management programs to address the impact of climate change, and to identify and promote nature-based mitigation actions for existing and planned infrastructure projects at critical sites. And now our slogan really needs to be changing from building a network of sites to securing a climate resilient Flyway network of sites. So it's an additional element that we have picked up in our new strategic plan and that we need to be working on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this. I think we're just going to move over to the next presenter. So again, just to see, can we? Yeah. So Dr. Seliger, it would be for you to share the presentation. So on the green.
Yes, I hope you can see it now. Do you see my...
Stop sharing, stop sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. Yes, it's coming up. Here we go.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay, hello everybody. I'm very happy to be there with you at this very important talk. We have few time and we have a big program to do, and I want just to give you an overview what I want to talk about. Very shortly about why we work on forestry in DPRK. I focus my presentation mainly on DPRK and mainly on forestry, though we also are very proud to work with EAAFP and the wonderful people there in the wetland conservation. And then I want to talk a little bit about what levels and possibilities of intervention there are, give an example of a tree nursery, and some more programs we did there, and then talk about the challenges and the potential for monitoring and evaluation, because that's, I guess, a very important point here, and a point which, especially in the context of DPRK, is not negligible. It's very, very difficult one. So why should we talk about sustainable forestry? North Korea, originally a country which had 80% forest cover, of which now 40%, half of which are now severely either degraded or disappeared due to a number of factors, the main factors being the breakdown of the old economic system in the early 1990s and the ensuing famine, or what the North Korean side called the arduous march period. And in reality, it looks like this. This is a photo of my colleague, Mr. Glenk, who is also here today. In 2015, whenever there's flooding or heavy rains coming up and typhoons coming up, they are only rather minor in the northern part of the Korean peninsula, because most of the rain actually is much further south. Often the centers are in the Philippines and Japan and maybe southern part of South Korea. But due to the lack of the forest cover, we have here every year catastrophes which also cause the loss of life. And you see here this region of Sonbong, which is at the border to China and Russia. And we had a village here north of Sonbong, and you see a satellite image from before the flood and after the flood, and many lives, maybe 100 or more, were lost in this village alone. So we talk here about a matter of life and death for people. And clearly this is an issue of microclimate, but it also comes to climate events on a larger scale. If you have more extreme climate events, it's especially hurting North Korea. And so we decided to work on this. This is a photo of where the village was until 3 years ago. And another village was built very soon on the other side. But you see here the same problems. It's a mountainside. We have mountain slopeland agriculture. So we have no forest cover there. So when the next strong rains coming, who knows how this village will fare. So we have here really a very urgent issue to consider. And we started around 15 years ago to work on, first of all, education on sustainable forestry, seminars, scholarships of students. We have currently 2 students of DPRK studying the course of sustainable forestry in Germany. Actually, they were supposed to go home, but they are stuck due to Corona and have the luck maybe to study 1 more semester at least in Germany. We did training, we did study trips to Europe, all of this for a long time. And then for 4 years, from 2014 to 18, we implemented a EU-funded larger program where we worked with the Ministry of Land and Environment Protection in DPRK, MOLEP, which has been a very good partner in this field as also in the field of wetland protection. And we did trainings, especially in the last years, on a new national forest inventory. And I want to say some more words on that later, maybe, because that would be a very, very important baseline study for any larger project, for example, Green Climate Fund project. We also supported publications in DPRK, which is very important since they have a limited access to international publications on tree nursery management, on seedling protection, on biodiversity, renewable energy, organic farming, number of issues, also now on the wetland side of it. And finally, as I said, we started with afforestation on a model base. I just want to give you some impressions of this. This is not very far from Pyongyang. Still, it's due to the lack of paved roads. It's a 1.5 hour drive for maybe 25 kilometers there. And when we originally arrived in this place, basically the hill which we were supposed to reforest, around 100 hectares, was completely devoid of any larger trees. There were a little bit smaller bushlands, but the soil was considered too poor to have real afforestation there. But fortunately, the nature is quite strong and can come back. And that's, by the way, an experience we also did, I mean, which South Korea also had, which in the 1960s embarked on afforestation. And this is a picture from only 4 or 5 years later, where you see we have now a very nicely growing mixed forest there with a small tree nursery, which our partners from MOLAB built there, from DPR built there. And all of this has been done with very, very limited funding. Basically, the North Koreans are technically and also in terms of knowledge able to do the afforestation. There are very few things. Somebody's drawing into my slides, is that true? There's also there's only a very few things which they cannot provide, like pumps or certain pipes or shades for tree nurseries, but we need a very, very limited funding really to come to very good results there, and that was very encouraging for us. We worked also on sustainability in a different way. Somebody asked in the chat, are there North Koreans here? Unfortunately, they don't have access to the internet yet, but they have their own intranet. And as part of this intranet, we supported the design and the building up of a website called Hwangum-san, which means Golden Mountain. It's a website on all issues related to afforestation and sustainable forestry. And currently there have been more than 20,000 documents uploaded on afforestation, on forestry. A lot of videos are there which have been subtitled, for example, from Japanese or from English into Korean. And this website is now available in all the large universities of the countries, like Kim Il-sung University or Kim Chek University, and also in many libraries of the provinces, so people can see them there, and also in certain parts of the forest administration. They are directly connected to this. And we started that in 2015, and until last year there were more than 1 million clicks on that website. So though it's a very specialized website in a country where universal access to the intranet or to computers is not at all given, we have quite a lively use of this tool. That was another encouraging point for us. We did trainings in Germany and other places. And as I said, the main focus of that was the forest inventory, because North Korea needs that as a baseline for any larger projects they want to do. Currently, North Korea has a 10-year plan on afforestation, where basically they want to cover all mountains. This started in 2015 and should be ready in 2024. First phase of that is successfully concluded. And then they have a 20-year plan towards a more mixed forest, sustainable forest, and also towards a more valuable forest. It's a new propaganda byword in North Korea. Namely, they want forests which also improve the livelihood of people, which is very understandable, because sometimes these forests will reduce the potential for sloping land agriculture. So they have to give an alternative for livelihood of the people. And that's a point we are working now on with the North Koreans. And this will also address climate change issue in forests, starting with the fact that the monocultures, if they are hit by, for example, drought, are much more endangered for, let's say, forest pests than mixed forests. North Korea did publish with our support manual on forest inventory, which is also very closely resembling that of South Korea, and which is very practical, which foresters can really literally put in their pockets. And now we achieved training for small groups on a modern forest inventory. The problem is clearly they are lacking finance on this, and there's also a lot of goods which are sanctioned because of dual use. They want to do a modern forest inventory, that means using GIS, and they cannot really connect to the internet, so they cannot really connect to the internet, so they have a lack of maybe freeware. There's wonderful freeware from the FAO on these issues. Remote sensing data is valuable, but is very sensitive, and they are don't like if you bring it into the country or so. So there's still a lot of challenges for us and for them to overcome in this respect. I want to mention here one more point. One of the very important issues for us was also to bring foresters of North and South Korea together, and we did that in mixed international seminars since 2012, more or less regularly, and we're very happy about this, that it was possible also to do training for both sides together. Then I want to come to some challenges, and you see the first one is really sanctions. At the moment, it is very, very difficult to do any project at all. And I think some of the targeting of sanctions, it's a political issue, but I think it should be mentioned, is obviously wrong, because while we have widespread evasion of sanctions in certain countries and certain issues, often humanitarian actors who are very transparent, among them from the US or from Europe, are targeted, and there would be maybe one possibility that we work for bulk exemption, that we say certain activities, be it humanitarian, medical now in the corona times, or be it on forestry, could be exempted at all. Also, there's a very dire need to create a clean finance channel for international projects. Currently, money is brought in cash into the country, which is very bad. And then the creation of denser relation is important. We invited a group from DPRK to the meeting of the UNFCCC in Katowice, I think it was 2 years ago, and there was a meeting with the Green Climate Fund, and we were very happy. And finally now North Korea also designated a DNA for that. My last point, it's the potential for monitoring and evaluation. There's a big problem because North Korea prefers closed-end, equipment-heavy, one-time activities, not really a longer-term perspective or cooperation. And there's a lot of physical limits to monitoring and evaluation regarding travel, accessibility, etc. There are a lot of model sites in the country already from 15 years of cooperation with the international community, but often there's no follow-up. So we had this experience also in South Korea, where we had a number of forest projects, which were more or less one-time measures or one-time events, and then there was no follow-up, and often these sites were degraded after a few years. And there's one example, that was a central tree nursery in 2008 and 2009, after the political relations soured between North and South. There was nobody anymore who was able to work with these solar panels, which were newly introduced into the country, and they were basically after 1 year standing around there and were not useless, and now they are long gone. So we want something else. We need a long-term and open relationship, and I think it can especially be achieved under the umbrella of international organizations. EAAFP is an example, the Green Climate Fund, UNEP, UNDP, and then with the inclusion of monitoring and evaluation requirements. Just want to say, we for our EU project, we had a mandatory independent evaluation, and it worked very well. Once the DPRK side agrees on the point, they stick to the rules there, and they were quite good in giving access to all the places and all the people our evaluator wanted to have, which was a very encouraging sign, I think. And also the long-term sustainability is related to long-term relations. And you see here, this is, for example, our model site. We have now, with a rather small project in terms of financially, a rather small project, a relationship which dates back for the last 10 years for this one site. And that's very, very good. And it's also encouraging clearly to see how successful it was in this case. The same is true for the website, which will stay while our support is not there anymore. The outlook, the question is, will be projects feasible of the Green Climate Fund? That means in the West, will they be accepted by the large actors? I personally would rather prefer to have not projects on institutional strengthening of maybe of a ministry or of a administration, but rather to have practical projects, because I think they would be as well feasible and acceptable for the donors as for the recipient, in this case DPRK. And one example would be a forest inventory, because that could give us so much knowledge on what the exact state of the forest is and what we can do with the forest. It was a little bit rushing through here, but I thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions now.
Thank you, Bernhard, Seliger. Thank you, Doug. This was a very insightful presentation from both ends. One to look at migratory birds and wetlands, one looking also at forestry, and the question of how to strengthen capacity where it's needed and how to work together for the greater good with respect to climate. And also highlighting a couple of points in respect of evaluation. That's always welcome. So I open it up without further delay. I open it up to the floor to have any questions. So we've already went through some of the questions that have been posted along the way. Maybe let me just start with some of them, and then people can start maybe writing up some additional questions, so we can have a bit of a discussion. So one question here from Sayan Bernhard was, can you please talk about the political will towards biodiversity conservation and climate resilience in the DPRK? I think we've heard already initial reactions to it, but can you maybe also from both sides, maybe I give Doug the first crack on it, to just reflect a little bit on what you've experienced in respect to political will.
So the Flyway Partnership's lead partner is the Seidel Foundation, because it's such a major focus of their work. And so the Secretariat assists them in activities. And we ran a Swan Goose Festival at one of the key staging sites for these birds on southward migration last year. And we found the ministry, MOLAB, very keen to really engage with the issue and to start to and keen to build capacity, because there's a real need to build the capacity to manage these important sites. Also, their Academy of Science is also there as well, and it would be great to see Academy of Science more involved in increasing the access to the knowledge base for managers of important wetlands in DPRK. So there's lots of interest there at the site level. Sites are always very keen to have capacity building activities, and also keen to bring in parts of local community to be part of that exercise as well.
Yeah, that's very insightful already. Maybe over to Bernhard. Yeah, please.
Well, if I want to add two things. The first is, it was very encouraging now in the Corona times, where we do not have direct contact with the North, or very rarely, and we cannot travel there anymore, that in the past 3 months, DPRK published a number of very interesting and good contributions on wetland conservation, on biodiversity, how it helps with climate change, on the relation of tourism and preservation of ecology, showing that in their own country it became a political accepted goal, at least. I wouldn't call it maybe a priority. Forestry, on the other hand, since a speech of Chairman Kim Jong-un in 2012, has been a political priority, which made our work there also a little bit easier. And the second point, there is this popular, I would call it misconception, that North Koreans only do international projects if they can receive financial aid. Certainly, material aid is not unimportant. It's for every country which needs it, which is poor. But we see a number of issues where we clearly can say they have a genuine interest in developing their own ideas, which are non-financially motivated, which are partly motivated maybe by a greater integration into normal political relations with the international community, and also I think which are motivated by a genuine interest in biodiversity and protecting, you could call it the treasures of their own country. It is part of their policy, and I think that makes our work with MOLAB, with the Ministry of Environment, so great, that we don't feel they're used only, or that this policy is something like a pretext only to gain access to resources, but it's really a policy which is very, very sincere, and that makes working together also yeah, a lot of fun.
Thanks, Bernhard. That's very encouraging. That's very interesting to hear. Just connected to this, there was a lot of questions that go into the particulars of what are the conservation efforts in respect to the particular species and flora and fauna, how have you looked at the conservation priorities in respect to this, and what has been the governmental encouragement on that respect? Is there any takeaways that you could share from this?
So I can recount one of our partners based in New Zealand has been travelling to DPRK for several years, and surveying the whole of the west coast of DPRK for migratory waterbirds during the time when they're on migration. And this has been very valuable work. They've partnered with the national IUCN NGO partner to do that. And so that information has been incorporated into MOLAB's inventory of wetlands in DPRK. And it's really shown how civil society, these are volunteers who are putting their own money into going and arranging all of this, and assisting identify these really important areas along the coast for the Ministry of Environment. So that's a very good example where civil society collaborated to deliver things in DPRK.
And that's locally in the DPRK that
our partner has done that. Yes, yes, by pairing with the national NGO there, who is the one that facilitates and arranges access to the areas.
Incredible, yeah. Bernhard, maybe over to you again.
I'm a little overwhelmed by all these questions which are coming up here in the Zoom. Cannot answer. I just want to say that clearly the general level of awareness is still low, and a lot of can be done. And we work with DPRK on so-called SEPA activities. That's communication, education, and in former time was public awareness, but today it's a little different. But let's say on awareness raising measures, and we, for example, ourselves go to Rason every year and distribute leaflets with species, and so that's quite interesting. There was a question which I want shortly to go on, how can you integrate wetland and forest conservation, which I find very important. The good thing, we work with one department in the MOLAB which does both, and a very resourceful department it is, under wonderful leading general director, a woman, Ms. Ri, and the problem is clearly that for them different trajectories to say here we have a wetland, there we have a forest, and there we have rice fields, and one is maybe under the Ministry of Agriculture, one is maybe a border area, it's military, and so that makes it not easy to come to more comprehensive programs. Would be wonderful. And last point I want to ask, how afforestation helps biodiversity. Clearly, it's a small observation from the ground, but it is wonderful to see once we got this mixed forest coming, the birds came back. Cuckoos are breeding there, and 3 kinds of raptors and this other bird. So it is really encouraging, and it's wonderful to see that the nature can rebound from such a dire situation as we have it there. But one last point, livelihood improvement, very important. We cannot say protect your forests and don't go into the forest, the mountain anymore, and don't do slope management. People would resent this, and rightly. They need a livelihood improvement. So, and the same for wetlands. We cannot just say leave the wetlands alone, leave the reeds alone. We need to give them a perspective, and that is now not easy for financial reasons and also for political reasons, given sanctions and everything. So ideally, it would be a combination really of both, saying we support farming communities, fishing communities, and at the same time teach them how to farm and fish sustainably.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks, thanks, Bernhard. Once again, that's very insightful to also see that projects like this need to be looking at the complexity of the different links between nature as well as and social benefits and look at that. On that note, one question was that just came up now from Pradeep. What are the main threats in terms of wetlands and the mud-fed habitat for migratory birds in the DPRK? I mean, we've heard before that you said one of the larger threats globally is human settlement and human development. So is that similar in the DPRK?
No, it is not similar. Because because of sanctions and because of where the country is at, there isn't this possibility of the international investment. Mm. So at times there have been proposals for large-scale developments in the coastal areas near China, as a way to both provide employment and economic benefits to DPRK, but to integrate that into the broader China picture of manufacturing. But none of that is able to go ahead with the sanctions. There is always the possibility of tidal power, which is one of the issues, but again, that requires a high level of investment, so it's very difficult for it to be nationally financed. So we're really seeing coastal habitats, for example, being much more like where China was perhaps 30 years ago, and so we don't see very much reclamation. We do see protected areas being very well protected. And there's another element to it as well, in that the coastal area is often a military zone as well. So there are other things that are happening which are restricting access and restricting use of the coastal areas.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Now to put that over to Bernhard, just to say.
Yes, well, one or two things. Maybe one thing, humans are everywhere the same. And clearly, when they have the opportunity for economic development, they will take it. And we have one example, the Ramsar site in Rason, which is really beautiful and very important. And aquaculture project started there, which is quite consuming of nature just at the site and eating into the Ramsar site. We have to live with this, and that's why this livelihood perspective is so important, that we have to give them perspective to have their livelihood. And we say one example is ecotourism or eco-based tourism, to say if people come there and enjoy the nature, they don't want to see concrete canals where they raise certain seafood or so. So that's the point we are working on with them. The second point is in terms of biodiversity. It starts already in the southern part in the DMZ. It's so amazing from 1 kilometer to the next, how you see we have species there, and we have a density of species. I think of birds like shrikes or so, which we don't see anywhere else anymore in the whole Yellow Sea area. And if you think that the Yellow Sea area, I think Doug said it, is this bottleneck of migration, then we can see how important these few remaining sites we have, because the population and industry pressure in South Korea is so much bigger, and in China is so much bigger than in the north. And it's a race with the time, I would say, to explain to them and to help them to protect these areas, so that at least one country or one part of the coast has still these more or less preserved wetlands and lagoon lakes, etc. And we really hope we can all work together on that. and gives them a reliable and sustainable perspective to do this protection, because it's not only for them, it's for the whole Flyway, and in that sense for the whole world also, yeah, if we understand biodiversity as our common task.
There was another question, and I wanted to link into this before we come maybe to a different set of questions. There was one question that came from Eva, just to you, Doug, but maybe as well to Bernhard, to say, can you further explain how the contribution to wetlands, how the contribution of wetlands to carbon sequestration is seen and is used? So in what particular respect would that be a concern or an opportunity for wetlands restoration?
Okay. So one of the points, one of the reasons why wetlands are sequestering so much carbon is because water is bringing carbon into the system, and this is soil carbon. It's locked up carbon. So so that's one of the great functions that wetlands are providing. As we develop more sophisticated systems to recognise carbon sequestration, wetlands provide a way for governments to get funding for that functionality, and wetlands are providing the full biodiversity provisioning. Whether they're sequestering, whether there's funds for sequestering carbon or not. So that's how I think that covers both the points there about the sequestration and the importance of it.
Thanks. Yeah. It's just now that we've heard, there's an array of different options when you look at the question of afforestation, the question of wetlands conservation, and both on the adaptation side, as you rightly said in your presentation, as well as on the mitigation side, if you like, when it comes to carbon sequestration. The question is then, where would you drive these efforts that you have currently in the DPR in the future? And one question was here, what are future projects or future things that are envisaged by both parties here?
So I think what is particularly important is this capacity building and assisting DPRK with their environmental agenda and building the capacity of the people that are making those decisions and that are doing the management of the wetlands. And so that's something, given the opportunity, that the international community can do. There are certainly lots of people who are very keen to be doing that, but they don't have the capacity to be doing it, or the resources to be doing it. So there are these sorts of impediments in the way, but there are opportunities, and it's very good for more organisations to be exploring those opportunities to collaborate and be able to help deliver for DPRK.
So Doug, if I see it from your perspective from a Flyway partnership Secretariat, it's really about the capacity question. It's about the question of how to maybe perhaps integrate better education or stronger educational methods to link either both countries, or to link with the international community to create that awareness and build capacity.
Yeah, and DPRK is very important for many of the migratory species of birds, which was a very important staging site and a wintering area as well. So it's imperative to try and have these important areas protected, because otherwise we'll see continuing declining populations and increased threat status of species.
It's a real transboundary issue. It's a real issue to look at. Okay, and then from Bernhard's perspective, I was just wondering, what would be future projects to envisage? And we've spoken about a couple.
Yeah, well, first of all, as I said already, to come from pilot projects to national policies, and DPRK moves that way. We had an early example that was when the Swiss Development Corporation started a project for 10 years on sloping land management and agroforestry, which resulted after 10 years in a wonderful national strategy. The same is true for wetlands and environmental protection now. There is a new strategy in the making in DPRK. And Then on the political level, for us also capacity building would be the thing to do, because that's also what we are supposed to do. But I would go one step further to say integrating North Korea in international agreements and conventions. GCF, you made a starting point now. They have a DNA and you have the first contacts, but really to come to projects. And in my opinion, again, to have a baseline first. On wetlands, we have it kind of with the wetland inventory. On forests, we still lack it, a forest inventory. Second point, which I want to mention here, also because we are in South Korea, an inter-Korean perspective on that. And I want to mention here one thing which is very closely related to climate change. We worked for 5 years to register projects of DPRK on the UNFCCC under the Clean Development Mechanism. Now that is over for certain reasons, but to come to joint projects, for example, South Korea has its own climate market with quite healthy prices, I would say, for CO2. So if you could include projects in DPRK in this South Korean emissions trading system, that would be a huge market. It would be actually a benefit for South Korean companies because they could do it cheaper there than in, let's say, in Brazil or in Bangladesh. And at the same time, it would benefit the environment on the Korean peninsula. That needs a lot of political decisions. And there has to be also a solution to the thing we all didn't talk about, but which is important, clearly the military standoff in the region here. But we should think about these issues and not just say, once we solved a problem we all cannot solve in the moment, then we can discuss it, but we should discuss it now and do training for it now so that we are able to move on and also to give DPRK a perspective and say, we can do something together, a lot together, once some certain conditions are given. I think that also strengthens our partners in DPRK. That would be, I think, a good avenue to go. So that's a little bit more the political perspective. But I agree totally with Doug that the first thing to do is capacity building.
Yeah, Bernhard, just to summarize this, these were a very interesting point. So we definitely have this question, pilot to national planning, national strategies, the question of inventories you mentioned, and how important it is to build inventories across different ecosystems and not only one to help that. I think you even mentioned remote sensing previously. That was an interesting point as well. And then this question of interconnectedness between both North and South, and the question of looking at joint projects as well as looking at the externalities, not only stopping at what is directly linked to the climate. Very, very insightful. Perhaps because we're running very short of time, I see there's many more questions on the particular rules and regulations and when visiting forest areas and when visiting conserved areas and also the different collaborations, partnerships in nature conservation. I think some of them have been answered, others not. But can we maybe tilt the direction again to the question of evaluation? Just because we've had shortly highlighted this in the presentations, I was just going to say, what are your takeaways in terms of challenges that you foresee for the future when thinking about how to build in good baselines and maybe how to ensure evaluation, that information that flows as well freely? Because I think you mentioned this, Doug, when you said knowledge sharing was one important aspect. Just to get a little bit of a flavor of that as well, if you like. Okay,
so well, quite a bit of the monitoring for the Flyway partnership is done by citizen science, particularly with the counting of migratory waterbirds. So citizen science play a big role in the nature of the partnership, and the involvement of NGOs is a sound way to bring that to the table. And we also have our INGOs working on the tools, getting the tools onto the internet so that they're available to everybody and people can access it, and decision makers that information can be used by decision makers in planning their conservation efforts for migratory waterbirds and for wetland management. So So our challenge still, an ongoing challenge always is raising the funds for the international NGOs to do that, and so that is often a little limiting. We're seeing more increasing opportunities to link information from one environmental data set to another purpose. The ASEAN Biodiversity Centre is wishing to develop a tool for ASEAN countries about wetlands and particularly coastal wetlands as an information base. So these tools will help us because it will bring the information that is being collected and be serving up that information in a more systematic way. So I see there are good things moving now, but we have lots more to do.
Yeah, no, very interesting challenges on both sides, to be honest. And saying there's citizen science that needs to be strengthened, of course, and then the question of on how to link this to the various points. Bernhard, maybe over to you for evaluations, and I just maybe one particular thing that you mentioned, independent evaluation, so clearly, and we are obviously as the Independent Evaluation Unit always keeping our independence and holding that dearly. The question is then, so what are the takeaways on how to spin this idea of evaluation is needed and necessary means to learning in the DPRK?
Yeah. Well, I would say, first of all, whenever you have a project, you need to put evaluation and monitoring from the beginning into the agreement. Because the flexibility in DPRK is not very great. So if you come post factum, where you have done an activity and say, suddenly we want to have access to this and this person or to this and this area, it might well be that they say, no, sorry, it's not possible. So you have really to have a clear understanding in the beginning. Then I would say once they accept it, it is very good. They really stick by it and try to fulfill the spirit of an agreement. Second point, to show them international examples, not to single them out and say, because we are in DPRK, or not giving them the feeling maybe to say, we have to control you, we have to, I mean, there are a lot of difficulties, you know, with money flows, with sanctions, etc. But to show them also, for example, through international projects, to say this is normal, and that can be waterbird monitoring, it can be monitoring of forest development, or it can be remote sensing. We brought them a lot of examples how it is done in other countries, and then they accepted it. Or I remember for the CDM projects, which we did around 2010, for many years they said we cannot really do that, put all the information on very sensitive things like our electric grid on the internet. But finally, they could do it. And you find still 6 or 7 projects are registered under the UNFCCC with data which you cannot find for any other project that were hydropower project mainly in that country. So they do accept it if they see it's an international obligation rather than singling out them. So you have to be also a little bit country sensitive. It's not different in other countries, I'm sure. I only know DPRK better, but you will know it for a number of other countries where you have a lot of restrictions maybe, or national cultures which have to be dealt with. So then I wouldn't say it's so much different. There's a little more communication difficulties like in South Korea. I'm sure here we are super connected, they are not, but besides we can overcome all that and be a little bit patient, and then we come, I think, to good results there. A little more practical aspects here.
Yeah, I think I hear from you that it's all very important to look at the practical aspects, not so much at the maybe institutional aspects, because that's where you can strengthen directly with the people, and that where you can work with the people in a much more face-to-face and eye-to-eye manner. Yeah, no, absolutely. We have reached almost the end of this talk. I'll just maybe look at a couple of more questions here. There were another question. Yeah, that we've just responded to the last one, that maybe M&E is a bit more challenging topic to bring to the DPRK. I think it's been a great feedback from you to hear that start from the beginning and put this in early. I think the DPRK is not very different from other areas. The other question that was interesting here was also from David on further to the question about landscape scale opportunities. is there good awareness of the needs of catchment scale planning, and which seems critical for many different ways. I'll hand this over to Bernhard again. It connects definitely with conservation, but maybe Bernhard has an interesting take on this.
Well, I don't see the question here, but if I understand it directly, what I think is, and what we did start capacity building on, is something like comprehensive landscape planning. So we have not a single afforestation or a single wetland we protect here, but we want to look comprehensively at the landscape. For example, if you look at small rivers or streams going through rice fields, you have an enormous erosion problem there. And we can not only focus on having here a small mountain forested, but we would need also erosion planning, etc. And so that's very important. We did work with IUCN on that. I'm not sure if somebody from IUCN might be here, at least has the same name, who went with us to DPRK. So that's a very important topic to come. And the DPRK partners, they realize that. But clearly, as I said, due to the different ministries which are involved, interministerial cooperation is for us a point we couldn't break yet, or we couldn't overcome yet, especially the Ministry of Agriculture with this strong view of food security, which is necessary in the country. For them, these topics are of a second order, and we still have to integrate both of the views together better, maybe.
And would you then say also for the landscape approach, because I see another question that came for the landscape approach early on from Ward, saying, can we reflect on taking a potential landscape approach addressing climate change adaptation? And so the integration of both wetlands and forest restoration efforts, also vis-a-vis other land uses like agriculture and so on. Would you, can you see that potential?
I would agree, and I would say, yeah, it would be a GCF project to do that. Take a county, let's say, so you need, it must be, the area must be large enough and must be diverse enough to have these different elements together. And the county level would be, I guess, feasible and a wonderful idea to say, we do a landscape, comprehensive landscape planning for this county, and we have protected areas, and we have wetlands, and we have afforestation areas, and we have erosion protection areas, and we have watershed management. All of this could be included, but it would need a certain level of funding, which would go, I guess, over what we can do, or Flyway Partnership can do. So it would need really also a certain funding there. And yeah, that's, I would call it a GCF project.
That's very good of you to say. So I think we've slowly reached the end of our talk. Again, thank you very much. Maybe I'll hand it over to maybe a last point that you would like to make, Doug, a last takeaway that you take from this talk, talking about conservation as well as afforestation. Anything you'd like to share, and I'll give it over to Bernhard as well.
Well, really just about international collaboration that is so important in our world, that we collaborate between states, and that our communities collaborate, people to people, and that's the type of initiative that we're working in. The benefits are fantastic, and it's what we need to do to resolve these large world problems. They can't be solved by individual countries and the people of individual countries, and we need to just continue to build this collaboration between countries and for migratory water birds across the whole flyway.
Right. Like the migratory birds, we need to get this linkage between the different areas and the different continents even. Over to you, Bernhard, for some last takeaways.
Well, Doug said it, it's about international collaboration, and in that sense, I'm very encouraged that we have such an international community here today, listening and doing all these questions, and whatever we can still answer, I'm very willing to do it also after the meeting, through email contact or so, and I would encourage everybody being here also to bring his strengths and his insight and his experience into this international collaboration, then I'm very sure we can do it together. And wonderful, Andreas, for this great opportunity to talk about these important issues here.
No, absolutely. We'll be sharing the emails if you like, or if you just want to pop it down in the chat box, that's fine. And you can obviously continue to discuss these issues. Very, very important to say that. Thank you, Bernhard. So with this, I bring it to the end. I just want to let everyone that there's 2 other webinars that are coming on next. So one is from our friends from the Flyway partnership. There's a Flyway partnership webinar, World Environment Day with Professor Nick Davidson on the 5th of June. And there's also our next IEU Virtual Talk with Dr. Anja Grobicki. She's the Deputy Director of the Adaptation section here at the Green Climate Fund. And she will be speaking to us about water management, waterways, and this event will be on the 18th of June. So with this, thank you very much for joining. This has been a great time, a great meeting to talk about the issues at hand in the DPRK. And thank you very, very much, and see you soon to one of our next meetings. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.